All right, we are live with Shimrit Ben-Yair. Welcome to the show, Shimrit.
Thank you, Tom. It's so good to be here. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Happy almost Christmas or winter holidays and
Yes,
time off from video conference meetings. Have you had a few
indeed.
this year?
Maybe one or two.
Oh man. Well, you and I have worked together, so but I'm guessing people who watch this on replay may not be as familiar with you. Can you start with just like a quick introduction to Shimrit?
Yeah, happy to. So my name is Shimrit Ben-Yair. I lead Google Photos. I have been at Google for the past 12 years, kind of have held different leadership roles at the company. I started on Google Docs and Google Groups. Then I was the first PM on Google Plus. That was an interesting ride. Maybe we can talk about that a little bit today. Then I moved to YouTube. I led YouTube Kids, and then I led YouTube Community. So many of the social engagement features of YouTube. And then about 3.5 years ago, I joined Google Photos as the GM, leading engineering, UX, product, sort of the entire product and team. Before Google, I was a software engineer. So I worked in a few different software engineering roles. I have an undergrad in computer science and math, and I have an MBA from MIT. So,
Right
oh,
on.
and also important, I am also mom of three kids. So I have three kids, 10, 7, and 4. So it's definitely quite busy.
Yeah. So that might be one of those situations where having a winter break is good or bad, depending on how much time those kids
It's
require.
good. I feel like my kids have entered ages where I'm not dreading breaks or weekends anymore. We are all sleeping in. Everyone's eating the same food. No one's in
Right.
diapers.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying it.
Yeah. I felt like once my kids could buckle themselves up in the car, that was like a huge movement for us. So I'm glad that we'll all have time with family. Tell me a little bit about the move from software engineering to product. Was that something you had thought about from the very beginning, or how did you make that kind of switch?
Yeah, it's a good question. I actually think that if I reflect sort of on my career up until now, uh, I think the thing that is kind of like a thread that I've has been woven throughout it is this. I've always been at the intersection of things. So even when I reflect on when I was in high school, I grew up in Israel and went to high school in Israel. You choose what to sort of focus or expand on. And I expanded on math and physics on the one hand, but also literature on the other hand. And to me, like that mix of both sort of things that are more artistic, more creative, on the one hand, and then also, I really love. I'm a big nerd. I love math. I love, kind of being very analytical. And so when I studied software engineering, and I actually loved being an engineer. I think I could also have seen for myself, growing in a software engineering role as a software engineering leader. But ultimately, I went into product because I love the creativity element of it, and I love the cross-functional element of it. Looking at things through so many different lenses, and working with different people, and finding win-wins. That's another part of my job, or the job of a PM, that I think is so fun. Is like, figuring out, okay, it's like this big riddle with so many moving pieces, and then how do you mobilize it? How do you make progress? Even though when you initially look at some of these riddles, they seem pretty impossible to solve.
Do you remember some of your first PM projects? Like, what was that? Was it hard, or did it just kind of come naturally right off the bat? How did it go?
Um, I think a mixed bag. I think, I've had my share of projects that have been accelerate and amplify. Like, this thing is going really well, do more of it,
Mm-hmm.
and also, like, this thing does not have product market fit. So like, what are you going to do with this thing that does not have product market fit? I think, earlier in my career, I definitely, and I think that this is kind of a thread when you're growing as a leader, is the ability to deal with ambiguity, is like a big thing that kind of characterized my personal growth, and I'm sure many others who are in the same area. So early on, I was very focused on like execution. If I'd write a PRD and people would submit comments, I'd be like laser focused. You have to resolve those comments. That's like reply, resolve, and today I much more see the feedback I receive as a gift. I'm like, oh, what did I miss? Like, what are we missing? Might there be a really important perspective here that I'm not thinking about? So I think that, that's a big difference when I reflect on the earlier days of my career versus today. I also think that, another thing that changes when you're sort of growing through the ranks is like the ability to handle criticism, and develop resilience. I think that, again, like I used to sort of like take things more personally, or really like not be able, not be able to distinguish between what is something that is like wrong about the project versus what is something that's wrong about me. And I used to like identify a lot with the decisions that I'd made. And I think that as I've grown, I actually have learned to detach that and say, I may or may not make a good decision. That does not mean that I am or am not a good leader. I was acting with the information I had at the moment. Let's use it as a learning opportunity. I can make different decisions next time or do it better next time. And I think building resilience has been a key element of my growth, and being able to compartmentalize, because I do think, we're all very busy, right? And so if you're constantly ruminating on like hours on end on things that happen, you can never recharge. You can never enjoy the ride. You're always worried about something else. So like for me at 5:30, I log off until 8:30, until my kids go to bed. We all put our devices in like this little corner of like chargers and devices. That's always very messy. And I think like the ability to do that is really critical for like our family, but also for myself. And then over weekends, vacations, I'm a big fan of, enjoying work when you're at work, not feeling guilty about not being at home, and then enjoying home or other things that I do, and not worried like, oh my God, should I be checking my, emails and pings every single minute, kind of be where your feet are, is good advice that I received early along the way that I really like.
Were you always like that, or were there periods where you were more kind of indexed on work 24/7, or did you find that balance from the beginning?
I think it's a skill that was developed for sure.
Yeah.
I don't think I was born with that understanding. I think through trial and error, and also through developing self-awareness of what works for me, what environments do I thrive in, why or why not, what environments that I lead are allowing people to thrive, why or why not. I think that ability to actually see yourself through other people's eyes, or like separately, is a really critical leadership attribute. And many of the leaders that I admire the most have the ability to do that. They have the ability to sort of detach from their own perspective in the moment and say, okay, in this room, what position am I holding? How are people seeing this? And, that may be a small meeting room, or it may be, you're talking to the world, making a big change on, for your company or your product, et cetera.
Shimrit, you mentioned your early work on Google Plus, and obviously that was like a huge deal.
Yeah.
Like an all hands, everybody at the company
Yeah.
was focused on that. What did you learn from that experience?
Yeah. That's a good example. Tom, you'd asked me about like riddles that I was about able to solve or not able to
Mm.
solve. Like this, I was not able to solve. I think that, and there's so much to say here. Let's see. So first of all, Google Plus started at the company with like so much excitement and so much energy. It was a fun project. Like definitely in the early days, and I'd say like through its mid days, was a super fun project with lots of really smart people. By the way, many of those people I work with till this day. Either
Mm-hmm.
I'd ended up working with them at YouTube later. The Google Photos team actually spun off of Google Plus, and we still have many, many long timers from the original Google Plus days. So I think talent wise, it was an absolutely stellar team. And I'm fortunate to have been a part of that really strong group. So I think that was good. I think ultimately, if I were to, and of course, everything's clear in hindsight.
Mm-hmm.
So of course, it's easy to say now. But if I were to point to like what are the key things that made us unable to solve that riddle, I think it boils down to a few things. The first is we fell in love with a solution and not with a problem. So we were very quick to say, okay, here's what's happening, and this industry is very hot. Google is excited to take a position in this space, and here is the solution. And now, similar to how Google has done with other successful projects, let's have a really strong execution
Right.
towards this. And, we can do it if we execute super, super strongly and super, super well. But I think when you don't have, strong product market fit, you can execute all you want, but you're not going to be able to deliver on it. It's kind of like a lossy supermarket chain. If you have one small grocery store that's lossy and then you expand to a chain, you're not going to, somehow recoup it. You're just going to lose more and more. And so I do think that falling in love with a problem and really thinking about, what problem are we solving for people in this space? What other products are they using? Why are they finding them compelling? How might we solve this problem differently? Will people look to us to solve this problem for them? Like, those are really critical questions. And sometimes when you're joining a team, you might feel like, oh my God, these are terrible questions to ask. Everyone knows this. But actually, like, these are the most important questions to ask, even on successful products. Who are we building for? Why are we solving this problem for them? And especially at scale, looking at it through the lenses of different user segments is really critical. So I think that was the first key learning, is falling in love with a problem, not with a solution, not trying to execute until you know that your solution works. And then the second was focus. When I think of the team, I think that the Google Plus team grew pretty fast and catered to a lot of use cases and try to do a lot of things. And I think, again, like focusing and really honing and making sure, double, triple, quadruple testing ourselves that this is the right thing to be doing before you grow the org, you grow the team, you grow the use cases, is really critical.
That first lesson about being falling in love with the problem and being really clear about who we're building it for and what problem we're solving for them, it makes perfect sense. And yet I've seen it in team after team across multiple companies that I've worked at, where these brilliant minds, somehow we relearn this lesson over and over. Why do you think it's so hard to kind of keep that front and center?
Yeah, it's a good question. Even now, as you're talking, I'm kind of thinking of so many more examples.
Yeah.
I think that ultimately, one, it's hard to see around a corner. It's hard to sort of take the information that you have and see around a corner and say, well, it may go around this corner and it may bend in this other unpredictable way that you don't know. And so I think that's one challenge. I think the second challenge is you're often getting mixed signals on other things that may have worked somewhat, and your early indications are kind of throwing you off.
Mm.
And so, you might be like, oh, and this may or may not work, but look at the data here. Early data is promising. And so I think like we as humans sometimes tend to be overly optimistic. So I do think that actually what helps in checks and balances there is really coming in with like a good sense of like, how will we know we're successful? What data are we going to look at? And what will tell us that we have been very successful? What initial data will make us feel really confident that this is the right thing to do? And then the third thing, and that is also something I don't feel like we do enough, is actually not just looking when you're falling in love with a problem. Of course, at some point you also have to fall in love with a solution. Otherwise, you're just, in this armchair, advisory role all the time. But not thinking about a solution, but really thinking about a solution space is a tool that I've seen be very successful. And thinking about what can you do to solve this problem, all the way from the very lightweight to the very heavyweight, or from something that it like tackles this angle versus that angle. And I think that often I see really good PMs do this, where they come in and they don't pitch you on these mocks or that solution, but they rather say, here's what a solution space looks like, and here's what the impact space looks like, and are able to paint much more of a picture of, the actual like world we're operating in, rather than like a single track, right? And I think it also helps address this challenge that you see, which is, sort of like the problem I alluded to earlier on, of like people over identifying with something. Because when you're looking at a space, you actually have less of these identification problems of like, it has to be this way, otherwise I'm not successful. Actually, it could be in a lot of ways. Let's try this, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. We don't have to attach our sense of, our sense of accomplishment or, morale based on like how something very specific works. We can look at it holistically and actually try different things.
How much do you think performance management and promotions kind of sometimes add some fog to this, in that, I've seen, and in my own experience, you get assigned to this project, you have this big launch coming up, like you're laser focused on getting this thing out there and landing it. And it's not common for you halfway through this or at any point to say, oh, I wonder if we should be doing this project, because you're so kind of goal oriented and you've got these OKRs. How do you think, what's a good way to manage that, to do the right thing for the company long term, but also, have measurable outcomes and career growth for PMs?
Yeah. I think this is such a good question. I mean, I think it's really critical to define upfront what success looks like, and have agreement on that, and make sure that that is not actually, again, related to a certain solution, right? And so, but look, I think that it's hard, because, many companies, Google included, we're not the only ones, you kind of show impact as a proxy to, supporting performance at the next level. And, and I think that either when you need to continue exploring product market fit or scaling ability, or when you're in a space, the development times are super long, right? Like think of the hardware space, or think of, spaces with a lot of dependency on other companies, partnerships, right? It can be pretty hard to sort of see that through the lens of that timeline. And so I think that, the move to actually define like growth, not only through that lens of immediate impact, but through actually the lens of understanding who we're solving for, showing that we're making progress towards better understanding them, offering a range of solutions, showing that you have milestones that support that, even though you may not have landed the full thing, but you have a set of milestones that you're meeting and you're seeing also the data that you're expecting at each one of those milestones. I think some of those things help you kind of, broaden just showing landed impact. But yeah, it's I think it's really important, and I think these incentive structures matter a ton. And so thinking about that, I think, is really critical for managers who want to grow their talent. Is like, how do you break it down for them and allow your top talent to both grow in their career, but also tackle really hard problems and not super optimize for the short term.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Tell us a little bit about those moments where the PMs are asking the hard questions and maybe new data has come in that challenges some of the initial assumptions for what was a very credible plan, and now they've figured out, oh, okay, we had a blind spot here. We talk about startups doing pivots, but that happens in big companies too, or with existing projects. How do you think about navigating pivots? Because oftentimes it does impact people's, like, some people might say, hey, I've been working on this project for 2 years and I don't want to even hear pivot because I need to land this thing and just get over the line. How do you play a role as a leader in that process?
Yeah. I think it's really critical. I think you see it in big companies and small companies, and it's, and I think the word pivot, the word pivot implies that what we did was wrong and now we need to do what's right. And I think it is important. Language matters, and I think it's important to talk about things as an evolution of, like, okay, we may have started with this thing that we thought was right with the information that we have, and now with the new information that we have, we need to evolve it to make sure that we're not just continuing with momentum, but we're actually, incorporating all the signals that we have to make sure we're doing what's right here. So I think leaders play a really critical role in narrating these things and in explaining what they're seeing around them. A metaphor that I've heard that I love is, you're at the top of the hill and you're telling everyone around you what you're seeing from this top of the hill, and some of the people around you, some of your cross-functional counterparts, your people on your team who might be more junior, they don't have all the information that you have. You're on the top of the hill. You're explaining to others what you're seeing. And I think that is a really critical part in being able to land these types of evolutions, is storytelling. And not, and I think sometimes as leaders, we feel like we keep saying the same things over and over. Repetition doesn't spoil the prayer. You might feel like you're saying the same thing over and over. People love hearing, yes, like, this is why we're doing it. This is why it matters. People don't get tired of hearing those things. So, or don't get as tired as we are often tired of ourselves hearing those things over and over. So I think talking about the why, I think modeling that behavior and actually saying, I hear, you're not alone in this. Like, we are undergoing this as a team, right? And displaying that, as a leadership team, we are part of the change. We are embracing the change. The change is impacting everyone. So not to isolate, like, one or two people, poor souls responsible for, like, all the difficult things that have to endure. We as a group are undergoing this change, and we as leaders are embracing it and showing how it impacts us as well. And I think again, like, transitioning impact from delivering on a specific solution to solving this really critical problem for the industry that we love, that we think is so ripe for these type of changes, and talking about delivering that impact over delivering a certain solution. But look, it's always hard. Every time I've done it, it's been hard. So I think it also goes to the resilience part of saying, it's hard and we can do hard things, and sometimes we need to do hard things, and they're going to also be a learning opportunity. We're in it for the long run, and let's see what we learn and make different mistakes next time we have to make changes.
Shimrit, one of the things that I've often reflected in my PM career is how important it is to have a very successful relationship with your engineering counterpart, and was curious to get your thoughts for PMs out there who, let's say they're working with an lead or a TL that they don't always agree with, or
Mm-hmm.
they bring different worldviews to the table. How do you reconcile that?
Yeah, I've been there. Um, there's, I think, there's a proverb, maybe you know it, Tom, which is like the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is today. And meaning, like, relationships take a long time to build. And I think that this is whenever people join a new team and they come and they tell me, what should I do? This is absolutely the number one most important thing to do the minute you join a new team, is to start building strong relationships with your key stakeholders. Oftentimes, engineering is the most important stakeholder, but there are many others. Sometimes UX lead is the most important stakeholder, marketing, business development, whoever those key people are, you need to identify them very, very quickly and really spend time not only understanding them as humans and hopefully liking them, but also, like, what are they incentivized to solve? Like, what perspectives are they bringing here that you might not know? How do they see success? I'm always stunned, time and time again, even in the most aligned teams, how people can be slightly misaligned in these things, and they don't often give it words. They don't often talk through these things. So I think building the ability to actually talk about, oh, I came in to solve this problem. What do you think? Is that the right problem to solve? How do you see me show up to solve this problem? How can I work effectively with you? How do you like to be communicated to? Again, asking basic questions, which sometimes people are shy to ask. They feel like, I should know this, or I should come in with an opinion. It feels vulnerable. But actually, I think it's some of the most important questions to ask is, how do you want to work together? And how might I make sure that I am not overlooking your really important perspective in this? And so I think investing in those relationships is really critical. And then I think the second thing is, as leaders, there's, we're wearing several hats. Obviously, we have to manage downwards our teams, people who report to us or rely on us. We have to manage sideways, with different stakeholders, maybe in other PAs or other functions. And then we manage upwards, right? And of course, you need to do all these three things, but everyone only has 168 hours a week. So you're not going to do all of them all the time. And thinking about the mix of how much time you spend managing downwards versus sideways versus upwards, where you are right now, is really critical. And when I think of how I've grown as a leader, and especially when you join a new team, probably up front, you need to establish a lot of rapport with the folks reporting to you or looking up to you. So like, you do that. But then at some point, you need to actually give them much more space and focus on managing sidewards and managing upwards. And maybe sometimes there's something on the team, you need to go back to that. But constantly thinking about the mix of how you spend your time in these relationships is really critical, and can often just happen with momentum. And I encourage everyone to really think about, building these relationships and constantly reflecting on how you're spending your time mobilizing the right people.
Yeah, your point about asking some of those basic questions reminds me, like, it's possible for a PM to spend a lot of like clock hours and one-on-ones with key stakeholders, but do they really have the kind of meaningful conversations, or is it because it's easy to have this like faux alignment where 30 minutes goes by and you're like, oh, I have my one-on-one with this key stakeholder, we're good, but neither of you really got to this thing that's maybe separating you, or you have a different point of
and
view.
It can even have the opposite effect where people feel like, I meet with them every week, I say the same thing, and nothing happens. You can be spending the time, but if you're not really spending it and in the way that unlocks what the other person wants to achieve and kind of mobilizing this big thing you're trying to move together, I think that can be even more frustrating. And I always encourage people, one of the things that I've done both in business school and at Google actually is I've taken a coaching class. I'm not certified as a coach, but I found the principles in coaching, the principles around active listening, the principles around, what are some of the methodologies to get people to think more broadly, the not offering solutions quickly and actually giving people more space to come up with those themselves. These are really great skills. And I think that often as PMs, we spend so much time on the analytical part of our work, on like this, here are some trends in the industry, or here's this, new data tool that allows us these conversion numbers. And those are great. There's a place for that. But I actually think that as PMs, what's our job? Our job is to speak for humans. Our job is to speak for the humans who are building products for. And so we actually have to spend a lot of time understanding humans and working effectively with humans. And I think that can sometimes be a little hidden from us or not so clear to us.
You talked about speaking for humans, and earlier we mentioned the importance of understanding the customer and the problem. What are some, methods or strategies to really becoming an expert around our users and our customers to have that insight?
Yeah. Great question. I think this is a really important question because sometimes like a seemingly simple product can actually mask that you're really solving for many different people, right? And so I'll give YouTube Kids as an example. For those of you who have kids or have used YouTube Kids, what is it? It's like a single, carousel of videos with 5 tabs and a settings page. I mean, how complex can something like this be, right? Well, it's very complex, right? Like surfacing the right content, offering the right categories, working with creators, but I think our work sometimes masks a ton of complexity. And part of that complexity is understanding who you're building for. And so in the YouTube Kids example, obviously you're building for kids and all the things that come with being a kid, like the content that you need to consume or that's appropriate for you to consume, your what we call, your fingers, who might be kind of, less dexterous than an adult's fingers, ability to read or not read based on your age, a lot of things that come with designing for kids. But you're not only designing for kids, you are designing for their parents too, because you need to give them tools to be able to monitor what their kids have watched, to say, I like this, I don't like this, I want a time limit, and that parent might only be using the product 0.0000001% of the time that a child might. But if the parent's unhappy, the child is using the product 0% of the time because it's going on top of the fridge. So thinking about but if you just looked at the data, if you just made a data decision, you would say, oh, great, let's focus on the kid. No, you need to focus on the kids and on the parents. And then again, in a product like YouTube Kids, you, of course, also have the constituents of the creators creating kids content. So you need to work with them and understand how they're creating this content, what do they need when they're surfacing that in YouTube. And then you have the industry, you have a lot of stakeholders advocating for kids, you need to understand all these different perspectives. And in order to do that, you need a really strong cross-functional team that reflects these perspectives. So again, it comes from your engineering leader, design leader, BD leader, partnerships leader. Like, you're not going to have, as a PM, if you think you can reflect the needs of your varied user base, you're probably not thinking broadly enough about your product. You have to invite other people in to be really meaningful partners in the conversation, so that you can continue to be on this journey of reducing, blind spots and areas that you might not be thinking about.
There are some people who advocate PM spending a significant amount of time, I guess, pre-pandemic, like out of the office with users, with customers. What's your take on the value of that versus, you have UXR studies, you have surveys, you have, you know, uh, customer feedback from other channels. What's your
Yeah.
take on being out there with them?
My take is that, and it actually goes back to like what I said about what's been driving me personally as a PM, is I think the magic is in that intersection of quant and qual. And I think the magic comes from both having data at scale, but also being able to tell that story and make sense of that data and talk about like how the data is meeting people. So I do think that PMs need to be spending more time doing their own logging, setting up their own dashboards, making sure that they really understand the data. And that perspective is really important. Working with user segments. I think having user segments for your product and evolving those user segments as the product matures is a really critical part of being a good PM. But also hearing from users directly, because, like data can obfuscate stories, and data can kind of tell you like the median and the average and the CTR and all this data, but you need to actually have really key, like, okay, here are our critical user journeys, and here's how each one of our segments, they're coming to the product and trying to achieve what. And so having this sense of like, this is what they're trying to accomplish holistically, and marrying that with the data, I think is the most powerful place. But it's not one or the other. It has to be both, I think, to be effective.
There are some people who will watch this who might be earlier in their career and they're very focused on having good artifacts, like good PRDs, good roadmaps, good kind of exec review decks. What advice would you give them about some of those kind of nuts and bolts of PMing?
I think it's good. I think it's good to have good artifacts. I actually used to have like a PRD template that I used for many years as a PM. Start with why this is an important problem. Like, what's the problem? Obviously, is the first thing you're talking about in a PRD. Why it's an important problem. If we solve the problem, what would be the impact? What are some other products solving this problem? And then going into some of the designs and the practicalities of the solution or the solution space. So I think that's really good. I think, look, ultimately, you're trying to build trust in a world where people are very busy. And so how do you build trust? People might see a doc and say, oh, this PM is really good. Look at this great doc. Or they might hear you in a meeting and you might have unlocked the meeting with some insight, or you might have unlocked the meeting with saying, I heard you say X and I heard you say Y. And so is it fair to say that, these are the two edges of the spectrum and we should be thinking about these two are somewhere in the middle? Being able to advance not only docs and things you have offline, but conversations, discussions. This is where I see PMs being really valued and trusted. And then following through, saying you'll do something, doing it, and then communicating back. I think this is often, and I, when I talk to PMs, especially earlier in their career, and I tell them, how do you communicate with your manager? How do you show progress? They often kind of feel like, oh, I feel like I don't want to be like tooting my own horn and saying I'm so good. But like, it's also an important skill to build up. You have to be able to say, hey, this week I did 1, 2, 3, and next week I'm doing 4, 5, 6. Did that sound good? Would you do something differently? I think giving that visibility and welcoming input really inspires trust and also helps with that cross-functional collaboration. Because when you're able to actually expose that to your close working group, then you can all align, work on those same features, get things, kind of jive and get into that groove that we all know when is there, makes our jobs like so much fun.
Shimrit, you left the product management ladder in a way in your new role. You're now VP of Google Photos, all up, the GM. Was that a hard call? Or was that kind of like, oh, that's what you've been kind of looking forward to for a long time? How did you make that transition?
Yeah. I mean, actually, like when I reflect on my career, I think there have been a couple of these pivotal career moments for me um, at Google. Well, aside from joining Google, which I still feel so fortunate to have done, I actually think my experience on Google Plus was super critical. And even though for many years I felt almost like guilty and
Hmm.
ashamed that the product didn't succeed, I now realize it was a huge gift to me in actually learning a lot of things about how you might have an amazing, strong team and still fail, like what not to do. So I'm very grateful for that lesson. I'm very grateful for YouTube because actually, so when I'd left Google Plus, I was already managing quite a large PM team. And I joined YouTube. I joined YouTube as an ICPM. I was not managing a team. And for 2 years, I went back to like writing my own PRDs and doing all my dashboards and all the fun stuff that is to be a PM. And even though you might think, oh, did I take a huge career hit? Like, didn't I just want to continue, growing, managing larger and larger teams? It was actually a huge step function for me because I was able to work on a 0 to 1 product that is very was very interesting. Taught me YouTube, taught me a whole industry that I didn't know. So like that on paper setback ended up being a huge accelerant for me in my career. And then actually joining Photos, I'm also have been very grateful for. I think that sometimes people think like, oh, the GM, the GM job is like so easy because now you can just make all the calls yourself. And let me tell you, if like you make all the calls yourself, like no one will want to work with you because like that's not a very, good leadership trait, right? So I have been enjoying it. Google Photos is an amazing product with a super strong team all around. So my role on Photos was definitely to amplify and accelerate, and I feel like it's been great to do. It has been obviously some product work. There's also a lot of organizational leadership work. There's also a lot of work across Google and within the industry. So it is different than product management, but I've been enjoying it. I love it.
What was the hardest thing going from, formal product management to a GM role in terms of that transition?
That you're not the product manager anymore.
Yeah, what's the relationship like with your head of PM as a former PM, now GM?
You could ask them. I think it's a good relationship. It's a big, it's a change. I mean, look, it's a change. And it also was something that I came in and it was really important for me, again, like sometimes you join a team and it's a turnaround situation, right? It's like things are not going well. You have to turn it around. This was not the case on Google Photos. I joined Google Photos. The product had really strong product market fit. And we just, and there's so much more to do. So I came in and Photos had this amazing team that I did not want to lose. So I spent a lot of time just listening, understanding, building those relationships. And I think today, the way I work closely with product management and all of Photos functions is I spend a lot of my time on what are the right products, what are the right problems to solve? And if we solve them, what kind of impact might we have? So I spend a lot of time with the team on that. But the team has a ton of freedom on how they solve these problems. And, I want like the team often, like once we're in agreement that something is important to solve and like this is the type of thing impact we'll have, they have a ton of freedom with deciding, okay, this is what it might look like. This is the option space. So I like to be involved in that sort of let's agree on where we're going. But then I want the team is really running with a lot of these things. And I think that I enjoy it, and I think has been an effective working model.
We have some questions in the live chat, Shimrit,
Okay.
from Zach. Is there a specific thing that when junior PMs do it, you absolutely love it? And do you have a few tricks that you've developed to deal with common situations and challenges as a PM?
Yeah. Thank you, Zach, for this question. I love this question. The thing I love, so I think when junior PMs spend a lot of time with the data and they come in and they like spend a lot of time understanding, okay, let's say I join and I'm now responsible for feature X. Okay, great. If that person actually understand, okay, who is using feature X and why? How are they using it? What are the critical user journeys here? Are there big funnel losses? Like, are a lot of people trying to use them, then failing? Are they getting almost all the way to the end and then giving up? Like, coming in and then showing a really deep passion and curiosity for like how things are now, I think is really powerful. And then the second thing that I love when junior PMs do, and all PMs do really, is being able to contextualize how what you're doing actually compares to other products. And I think that this is something that is so powerful, which is to say, you know what, this is how we do it. Company X in a similar space does it this way. Company Y does it that way. Because oftentimes people on your team don't have time to do that type of market research. And I think you can learn from what other companies do, and often spend yourself years and years of development just watching mistakes or things that have worked well or things that don't do well, just literally by using other products. So I think that's really important. And the third thing is being really up to speed on industry trends. And, I often encourage people not only to read Tech Meme and Stratechery and all the blogs, but really to also deeply understand, okay, like what are some big things happening in the industry right now? And how might that impact us or not in what we're trying to build? So kind of operating at these different altitudes, like usage, other product comparables, and industry.
And any other tricks that you've developed to deal with common situations and challenges? Certainly, it sounds like focusing on the why and the problem and the customers, a common theme. Are there other things that you do that have served you well?
I think, and I think this one is so much easier said than done, is not being attached to a certain solution and being able to, let's say you came into a meeting and you're like, your hope was in the meeting, you guys would agree, you all would agree to do something. Okay, the meeting is not going there. You're getting a lot of pushback. Your whole plans, your grand execution plans, you can see them all fading away. But how might you still not let a good crisis go to waste and be like, okay, but this is what I'm hearing. Can I summarize what I'm hearing? Summarize what you're hearing and then ask, how might we take it from here? What are good next steps here? And sort of, open up the space, even though you came in to execute, to narrow down the space. If you're sensing pushback, you're sensing concerns, open up the space and hear, okay, so where are we? Let's just take stock. Like, what are good next steps here? Sounds like I'm hearing feedback on 1, 2, 3. I'm going to look at 1, 2. This person's going to look at 3. Should we find more time tomorrow? And so even though you might not have gotten what you wanted, people are leaving the meeting feeling like, A, Zach heard me. B, we can do hard things together as a team. And C, we have a plan. Might be a different plan, but we have a plan. And I think that really is pretty common and something that I think is a great skill to have.
Awesome. Next question is from Wes. There are a lot of product courses in schools and certs these days. Do you feel these are useful for PMs, or are they less useful than Battlefield experience?
Battlefield. Oh my gosh. Look, I mean, so full disclosure, I have not taken product courses or certifications, even though I'm on occasion hosted at some of these events. I will say that I think I think that being curious and constantly learning is a really critical skill for a PM. And I think that we actually don't spend enough time on that. And so I'm not saying like it needs to be through a certification or a product. You can create your own curriculum, right? What might that be? What is your own curriculum? Actually, earlier in my career at Google, I had this personal OKR for myself that I would take a class every quarter. Google has these grow classes. I took a design class one quarter. I took a Python class one quarter. I just created my own little learning journey. So what might that be for you? Can you schedule your own things? Maybe it's this formal thing, maybe it's this other thing that you're kind of like picking and choosing and creating your own adventure. I think is great. And then look, be a person of the world, read The Economist, read The New Yorker. I do think it's, again, like our job is reflecting human needs and building products to cater to those needs. So I think actually having a good understanding of the world and what you're seeing and be able to adjust at the macro level is really important too.
Awesome. I guess the last question I'd have for you, Shimri, before we wrap up, is if you think back to career advice that you've gotten over your career, what are one or two that really stuck with you that have served you well, that you've heard from mentors or people you admire?
You know, there was a certain time in my career where I was working on something, it wasn't going well, and a mentor in the org, I didn't report into them, told me, I think it's time for you to think of other roles. And I was devastated by this. I just felt like this person that I trust, he like doesn't care for me. I felt like a failure. I was very hurt by this. But after processing it, I ended up pursuing other roles, and it was a really, really great transition. And I think that sometimes from within our perspective, when we're so deep in the weeds, it's actually hard for us to sort of operate at the right altitude and see like what additional options are out there. And I'm very grateful that he kind of nudged me to explore other roles, because I think I probably would have spent a few more months being very unhappy in what I was doing. So I think the main takeaway from that is I am a huge believer in seeking counsel and in having strong relationships at work. And, it's both kind of having strong relationship with your core cross-functional group that you all are all building stuff together, but also with people who are kind of at the same place as you are in your career, or maybe a little further ahead, that you can confide in and can help you think through things. And I think that building and creating those types of relationships and nurturing them for many years, many years, has been absolutely one of the most important things in my career. And, now I feel like, it also like just opens up so many things from you that go beyond just counsel and mentorship for you. It's like you help other people, land roles, and you talk about advisory roles in other like there's just so many things it opens up for you. So I do think investing in those relationships and being vulnerable and being open to feedback is probably, and especially for earlier career PMs, like probably one of the best things you can do. But it will take time to come to fruition, for sure.
Amazing advice, Shimri. Thank you so much for spending time in the Fireside PM podcast. It's been the time flew by, and I hope we'll continue the conversation in a future episode, and wish you a happy holiday and New Year.
Thank you. And Tom, I feel like you're always on the interviewer side, but I don't know, I'm not sure everyone knows what an amazing PM leader you are too. And I have just felt so lucky to have worked with you at YouTube and to have stayed in touch all of these years. And you're actually a great example, in my opinion, of someone who, when at YouTube, you really so identified with creators and you actually spent so much time looking at the world through their shoes. And I think that that was really powerful. So I've always appreciated your voice and just, impact as a PM.
Well, thanks. And here we are on a YouTube live stream years after both of us are no longer at YouTube.
Yes.
So it is a great product. All right. Thanks, Shimrit. Have a great new year.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.